How old were you?
That time I was 21 or between 21 and 22.
Wow.
And that was interesting. We talked about, the espionage, about what's going on in the world. And I from early on, I showed how honest I am. I told him about some weaknesses that I thought I had, shyness with the girls, stuff like that. And then he started giving me some tasks. So, for instance, he would drive me to a building and point to it and say, see if you can find out what organization is in there. There was no nameplate, no nothing. So I had to, make friends with some people who walked out the door after work ended. I also one time was asked to knock on the door of a of a family and have a talk with somebody who opens the door to find out about a relative in the West. So that's sort of false flag interviews. So I pretended to be a sociology student and came with a survey. I asked him, could you answer some survey questions? No, pretty innocent, but sounded good. And as we were talking, somehow I find a way to sort of talk about West Germany and make it into a little bit of a social conversation. And you wouldn't believe how easily people volunteer stuff that you want to get out of them. So I didn't like doing this because, my shyness got sort of in the way, but I couldn't fail. Failure was not an option for me. So and I believe, this Herman guy eventually determined that I am a really good candidate. So he got in touch with Berlin, the headquarters of KGB in East Germany, and they invited me for a 3-week visit to Berlin. That was my first, trip as a would-be agent, because I was given a code name, a code phrase, a time, and a place where we would meet. And so I would go find that place in Berlin and meet my new friend, who introduced himself as Boris. I worked with Boris for about 3 weeks. He gave me tasks to do, and he also gave me West German literature to read. Der Spiegel, der Stern, the things that were forbidden. You were not allowed to have them, and almost nobody did. So that made me feel good, because I was already, I had 1 foot outside the law. And but having always been a contrarian, wanting to be different from everybody else, that was very flattering.
How long did your spy training last with them, and then at what point? How long did it take for you to be deployed to the United States?
Okay, so the base training was 2 years. That was their standard training period. I was already working as a assistant professor in college when they finally made me the offer. Then on the last day in Berlin, I got the offer, and within a month, I quit the university and moved to Berlin. By the way, that will be interesting to know. In those days, in East Germany, good apartments and nice houses to live in were rare. So here I am, I'm now in the KGB. I go to Berlin. I would expect the key to a nice apartment. So I meet my new handler, the boss that I had for the 2 years in Berlin, and his name was Nikolai. Interestingly, he was Ukrainian. And we talk in his car, and then he says, I have a task for you. That's your first task. Find yourself a place to stay. Now, he knew, and I knew, everybody knew, that all apartments and houses were under the control of the government. There was a waiting list up to 10 years to get an apartment for a couple with a child. It was impossible to just go and rent an apartment. So I could have failed. This was a pass-fail task. If I can't find an apartment, if I can't find a place to stay, they don't want me. I needed to show my ability to improvise. Yeah, well, so I did, and I figured the further away from Berlin I get, the more of a chance I have. I took the city train to the last stop, to a town called Ackner, and knocked on doors and asked if somebody had a room. Eventually, I found a place. It was an outbuilding. It was made out of brick, but it had two rooms. One had a bed and a chair, and the other one had a wood-burning stove and running cold water. And that's where I lived for 6 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So the training, after 6 months, I think Nikolai determined, this guy is a keeper. So he gave me a key to an apartment. So the training in Berlin was 2 years, and I was going to be departing for West Germany after 2 years. One of the things I was required to do, they told me everybody has to learn a foreign language. All right? And they gave me a choice. I said, I pick English. English was easy for me in school. I was straight A's without studying. And like with everything else, I gave myself 100% into learning English. I became a maniac. And within like 7-8 months, I had enough of a vocabulary to be able to read English novels without a dictionary. Every word when I read stuff, every new word I wrote down and I learned. It came to about 100 words a day. I counted them. And so one day, some guy from Moscow comes to visit, and he asked me, "So how's your English?" And I said, I pulled a book out and said, "I can read that, no problem." And he said, "What? All right, we're going to get you a tape recorder, and you just tape a message. You can talk about anything you want." So a week later, I get the tape recorder. I give it back to Nikolai. He sends it to Moscow. A week later, I was on a plane to Moscow because they had heard enough to think that there's a possibility that I have enough talent to learn American English well enough to have nothing but a slight accent left that can easily be explained. So in Moscow, I met with a college professor a Russian who taught English, and a born American, and we talked for about 2 hours, and afterwards they discussed it between the two of them, and it was uneven. The Russian figured, he can't do it, and the American, typical American optimism, I can teach him. So, bingo! Now they had a potential asset, somebody they could put into the ranks of the main adversary. That's what the KGB called the United States, as an illegal. So I was moved to Moscow to get another 2.5 years training, and then before they could launch me with the right documentation, it took another half year. So I spent 5 years in training.